Today, we're going to go over a comprehensive understanding of everything a home buyer needs to know about appraisals. So first, we'll start with the basics. What is an appraisal? An appraisal is a professional, third-party opinion of market value of a property. It's going to be required by lenders so that they can make sure that the loan amount aligns with the property value. Appraisals are different than inspections in that they don't have to do with the home's condition unless the home condition affects the value. So why do appraisals matter? Well, for buyers, you'd like to make sure that you're not overpaying for a property. So you can be under contract and an appraisal potentially can come in at the purchase price, below the purchase price, or greater than the purchase price. So the risk for buyers is to make sure that they're not overpaying for a property. For lenders, it's a little bit different. Lenders want to ensure that they're not over-lending on a property. It also mitigates their risk. So therefore, in the case of a default, that they know that the value of the property is still there. So lenders will only lend on the appraised value of a property. They do not necessarily lend on the purchase price. They will lend up to the appraised value on the property. Now, why does it matter for sellers? A lot of people ask me that all the time. It matters because it can make or break a deal. If an appraisal comes in low and you're not able to negotiate with the buyer to either come up in value or the seller going down in value, it can actually kill a deal. So an appraisal is actually really, really important. Myself or someone from our team will attend every single appraisal or at least provide the appraiser with some information about the neighborhood, comparable sales, upgrades done to the property, things that can affect value. I wouldn't assume that an appraiser has done an appraisal in that particular community before. They may have and they may know it very well, or it may be their first one in that neighborhood. So you never know. Who conducts the appraisal? The appraisal is conducted by a licensed appraiser that is hired by your lender through a third-party management company. You cannot choose your appraiser. Your appraiser, by definition, should be independent and creating an independent value. That being said, the buyer does pay for the appraisal. Typically, I see appraisal costs in Florida to be about $400 to $700, depending on the type of the property and how large it is and what's involved in the appraisal. So what do appraisers look at when they're doing their appraisal? They generally look at properties that have sold within the past 6 months within a 1-mile radius of the subject property. The subject property is the property that you have under contract. A lot of appraisers will look in the same neighborhood, look for similar properties. Sometimes comparables are not available, so they'll have to look outside of the neighborhood. There's also certain other parameters they have to look at. They're looking at the upgrades in the home. For example, if you have a new roof or you have new flooring, a kitchen remodel, or you've done any additions, a pool. Another thing that they have to consider is lot size. So the amount of land that you have for the property. Other things that are considered are school zones, location, water views. Are you on a lake? Do you have any kind of conservation view? So there's different types of things that the appraisers are looking at to come up with their opinion of value. That's another reason that we like to provide some of the information to the appraisers, such as has our seller installed a new AC unit, a new water heater, a new roof, what upgrades. The list of upgrades or improvements to the property is super helpful. Appraisers might not catch everything that's in the house, so that's why we like to provide that information to them. Generally, appraisers are in the house for only about 15 minutes. They do measurements, they take pictures, they take some notes. So any additional information that you could provide to them is extremely helpful to any appraiser, and usually they're very appreciative of that information too. So what happens if the appraisal comes in low? This year, we're starting to see some of the appraisals come in lower than the purchase price. That's happening as a national trend in certain areas, generally because we've had some softening in pricing in the market. So when the appraisal comes in low, you really have 4 options. Option number 1 would be to renegotiate the deal with the seller, to ask the seller to reduce the purchase price to the appraised value. Sometimes that can be successful. Sometimes it's a compromise where maybe they come down a little, you come up a little, but that would be the first option, is renegotiating the deal with the seller to ask that they come down to the appraised value. The second option would be, if you think you're getting the value and you really want the house, you're not able to renegotiate with the seller, would be to come up with the extra cash above the appraised value to close. So let's say you have a house that is $500,000 and it appraises for $480,000. In that example, you'd have to come up with additional $20,000 in cash to the table at closing to close that deal. Because remember, your lender will only lend on the appraised value. In this example is $480,000. So therefore, you'd have to come cash out of pocket for the difference. Your third option is to challenge the appraisal. So if you do research, and your agent can help you with this, and you find comparable sales that actually support your valuation, or you're able to get additional information that was not included in the appraisal, or some irregularities or inconsistencies, or some information that's simply not correct in the appraisal, you're able to challenge the appraisal. Now, I will tell you that in practice, I have found that it is rare to be able to successfully challenge an appraisal. That's probably for many reasons. It's also can be time consuming. And a lot of appraisers don't want to come back and change their figures because it has to go through a review process. And obviously that's their license and stuff like that. However, we have successfully challenged some appraisals when we have had really, really good information. It's all about how you present it. So that is definitely a third option. I don't think that is your easiest or your best option, but it is an option and we have been successful from time to time with that. Your fourth and final option, if option 1, 2, and 3 do not work out, is to walk away from the deal. So you're not required to continue forward with the contract if you can't come to an agreement with the seller, if you don't want to come out of pocket with additional money at closing, and if you aren't able to successfully contest the appraisal, you can just walk away from the deal. Now, in that circumstance, you will be out the money that you spent on the appraisal, and you will be out the money you spent on any inspections beforehand. But that is just the cost of doing business, and that is your fourth and final option. As a buyer, one of the things that's very important is to have an appraisal contingency in your contract. So that protects your deposit if the appraisal comes in low. It also gives you leverage to renegotiate with the seller, for example, if the appraisal comes in low. So do not take appraisal contingencies lightly. They're very, very important parts of the contract. And when you have a volatile market and changing valuations, you're obviously going to need to rely on that appraisal contingency. Some advice I want to give you is to be realistic about upgrades and improvements to the properties. So not every improvement is going to get a dollar for dollar valuation on your appraisal. For example, if you have a roof that costs $25,000, an appraiser may only give that a $10,000 value on the appraisal. So what are appraisers going to look at? They're going to look at the different upgrades, but not dollar for dollar valuation, different improvements, similar square footages, similar size properties in similar neighborhoods nearby. So you're going to want to have your agent pull those comparable sales in advance. So that way you can really have an idea of what the appraisers are going to look at. And that can really get you ahead of the appraisal. And before you spend money out of pocket on your inspections and appraisal, know if you think that valuation is going to come in close to your offer price and your contract price. So I want to add a note for new construction properties. We have a lot of new construction communities that are popping up all over Central Florida, and I get a lot of questions from buyers about the appraisals and how they work for these communities because they're just being built. There really isn't comparables necessarily to that specific neighborhood. So the way new construction properties work is the builders will tend to have all of the cash buyers close first. So therefore, that creates the comparables. So when a cash buyer closes, there is no appraisal necessarily. So therefore, it'll close at that purchase price, and then the finance buyers will close later, and the appraiser can use those as comparable sales. So you have a lot less risk in new construction communities because of that, because you're basically creating the comps for the appraisals with the cash buyers first. So to recap, appraisals are very important. They can make or break a deal. Obviously, different markets are going to have different issues with appraisals, so the market is constantly ebbing and flowing. Right now, we're in a market that has decreasing pricing, so obviously the appraisal is very important. Back in 2021, we had hyperinflation and increased pricing, so it was less of an issue. So if you want to stay up with the market that's consistently evolving and changing, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. We're always going to keep you up to date, and if you have any questions, give us a call.